If you ever wake up and realize I am gone, do not ask where I went. Ask yourself when you stopped seeing me. Those were the only words Natalie Brooks left behind, written carefully on a folded piece of cream-colored stationery resting beneath her wedding ring. Grant Sullivan stared at the note for several long seconds, convinced it had to be some kind of misunderstanding. Their mansion overlooked a frozen lake, its floor-to-ceiling windows glowing softly against the pale blue light of a winter sunrise. Business magazines had spent years calling it one of the most beautiful private homes on the East Coast. Reporters admired its architecture, investors admired the man who owned it, and guests admired the flawless image of success that surrounded the couple. Yet on that quiet morning, the grand estate felt strangely hollow, as though every expensive detail had suddenly lost its purpose. Grant called Natalie's name while walking through the silent hallway. No answer came. He checked the nursery they had spent months preparing together. The tiny crib stood beside the window exactly where Natalie had placed it. A folded blanket rested neatly inside, and a small stuffed rabbit waited patiently in the corner. Everything remained perfectly organized except for one unmistakable detail. The hospital bag she had packed weeks earlier was gone. Grant reached for his phone and called her immediately. The ringing echoed through the empty house before ending in voicemail. He tried again, then once more, hoping she would answer with a gentle laugh and tell him he was worrying for no reason. Instead, silence answered every call. His gaze drifted toward the security monitor beside the kitchen. With trembling fingers, he opened the camera recordings from before dawn. The video began just after 5 o'clock in the morning. Snow drifted gently across the driveway as Natalie appeared beneath the front porch light, wearing her oversized cream-colored coat. One hand rested protectively against her 8-month pregnancy, while the other pulled a small black suitcase behind her. She paused just outside the gate. For several quiet moments, she simply looked back at the mansion. There was no anger in her face, no panic, only a sadness that seemed to have settled there long before this morning. Slowly, she slipped her wedding ring from her finger, held it tightly against her palm, then placed it into her pocket before continuing down the snow-covered road until she disappeared beyond the camera's view. No taxi arrived. No friend stepped forward. No unfamiliar vehicle waited nearby. She simply vanished into the winter morning as though she had planned every step long before Grant realized anything was wrong. He replayed the recording again and again, searching for something he had missed. Then another detail caught his attention. Natalie never once looked toward the master bedroom window where he had been sleeping. It was almost as though she already knew he would not wake in time to watch her leave. Grant hurried upstairs, opening drawers and closets with growing confusion. Most of Natalie's clothing remained exactly where it had always been. Her favorite books still lined the shelves. Family photographs remained on every table. She had not emptied the house or erased her life. She had taken only what she believed she truly needed. As the first rays of sunlight spread across the frozen lake outside, Grant stood alone in the quiet nursery, holding the handwritten note in one hand and staring at the empty space where the hospital bag had been. For the first time in years, he realized that losing someone did not always begin with a goodbye. Sometimes it began with hundreds of ordinary moments that felt too small to notice until the person who lived them finally chose to walk away. The mansion remained unusually quiet as the afternoon light faded across the frozen lake. Grant Sullivan had spent hours walking from room to room, hoping he had overlooked some simple explanation for Natalie's absence. Instead, every corner of the house seemed to confirm the same painful truth. She had not left in anger. She had left with purpose. The nursery remained untouched except for the empty place where the hospital bag had once rested. A favorite sweater still hung neatly inside the closet. Her sketchbook remained on the shelf beside several parenting books she had highlighted carefully over the previous months. She had taken only the essentials, leaving behind a lifetime of memories that suddenly felt impossible to understand. Grant called her phone again while standing in the kitchen. The familiar ringtone echoed until her voicemail answered. This time, instead of hanging up immediately, he listened to the greeting all the way through. Her calm voice filled the empty room, sounding warm and reassuring, almost close enough to reach. When the message ended, he found himself unable to speak. A notification interrupted the silence. Vanessa Reed had sent a text asking whether everything was all right after he canceled several important meetings without explanation. Minutes later, she arrived at the mansion carrying coffee and pastries from a nearby cafe, smiling with quiet confidence as though she expected the situation to resolve itself. She looked around the unusually silent house before speaking. She probably just needed some space, Vanessa said gently. You know how emotional pregnancy can be. Grant nodded automatically, wanting to believe the explanation because it sounded simple. Yet something deep inside him resisted it. Natalie had never made important decisions on impulse. She planned every family vacation months ahead. She organized every medical appointment with handwritten reminders. She researched every baby product before making a purchase. A woman who approached life with such care would never disappear without preparing every detail first. After Vanessa left, Grant returned to the security recordings and watched the final minutes before dawn once again. This time he noticed something different. Natalie paused briefly beside the mailbox before walking toward the front gate. Curious, he stepped outside into the cold evening air and opened the small metal box. Hidden behind several ordinary envelopes rested another folded piece of paper addressed only to him. Inside, Natalie had written a single sentence. The answers you were searching for were never hidden. They were simply waiting for the day you were willing to slow down and notice them. Grant read the note repeatedly while snow drifted across the driveway. It did not reveal where she had gone. It offered no address, no request, and no explanation. Instead, it challenged him to look backward before searching forward. He returned inside and opened a cabinet where Natalie kept family photo albums. Page after page revealed birthdays, weekend road trips, quiet dinners, and ordinary moments that once seemed too small to matter. In nearly every photograph, Natalie smiled directly at the camera while Grant was looking somewhere else, checking his phone, answering a call, or preparing to leave for another meeting. He had always believed providing a comfortable life was the greatest expression of love. Sitting alone in the quiet living room, surrounded by memories that now felt painfully incomplete, he began to wonder whether the moments he considered insignificant had been the very moments Natalie had treasured most. For the first time since reading her farewell note, Grant stopped asking himself where she had gone and started asking the far more difficult question of when she had quietly begun saying goodbye long before she ever walked out the front gate. Grant barely slept during the following week. The mansion had become a place filled with echoes instead of conversations, and every quiet room seemed to remind him of something he had once taken for granted. He canceled another series of meetings, ignored congratulatory messages about a successful business acquisition, and spent long hours searching through the home Natalie had organized with such care. It was not a search for valuables or hidden clues. It was a search for the woman he suddenly realized he had never truly stopped to understand. Late one afternoon, while sorting through a cabinet in the home office, he discovered a small storage box labeled simply, "For someday." Inside were neatly arranged notebooks, greeting cards, and a portable flash drive. There was no dramatic message attached to it, only a handwritten note in Natalie's familiar script. Please watch these only when you are ready to listen instead of answer. Grant carried the flash drive into the nursery before connecting it to his laptop. The first video appeared on the screen. Natalie was sitting in the rocking chair beside the crib, wearing a comfortable sweater with one hand resting gently on her growing belly. She smiled softly at the camera before speaking. Today our little girl kicked for the first time while your father was presenting a new project to his board. He called later and apologized. I told him everything was fine because I knew how important his work was. I only wish he could have seen the smile that came before the kick. Grant watched the recording in complete silence. The next video showed Natalie decorating the nursery with tiny paper stars. She laughed quietly after one of them slipped from the wall. Your father promised he would help tonight, she said warmly. A meeting lasted longer than expected, so I decided to finish everything before he came home. Maybe he will notice tomorrow. Grant lowered his eyes. He could not remember whether he had ever noticed those stars at all. Video after video revealed ordinary moments that had once seemed insignificant. Natalie reading children's books aloud because she believed babies recognized familiar voices. Natalie carefully folding tiny baby clothes into drawers. Natalie sitting alone outside at sunset, talking gently to the baby about kindness, patience, and family. None of the recordings contained blame. None mentioned Vanessa. None accused Grant of being cruel. They simply documented the life Natalie hoped they would someday share together. As evening settled outside the windows, Grant paused the final recording and looked around the nursery with completely different eyes. The rocking chair was no longer just another piece of furniture. The books were no longer decorations. Every object carried a memory that Natalie had quietly protected even when she felt increasingly alone. The following morning, Grant arranged a meeting with Detective Laura Bennett, who had continued reviewing Natalie's voluntary departure. Laura listened carefully as he described the videos before gently explaining that everything discovered so far pointed toward thoughtful planning rather than sudden emotion. Natalie had transferred copies of her medical records months earlier, maintained her own modest savings from freelance illustration work, and handled every legal document properly. She had left no unpaid obligations and had taken nothing belonging to the company or to Grant. She prepared for independence, Laura said calmly. Not for conflict. Driving home, Grant finally understood something that had never occurred to him before. Natalie had not disappeared because she believed love was impossible. She had left because she no longer believed love could survive without time, attention, and presence. That realization settled quietly into his heart as snow began falling once again beyond the windshield. And for the first time since she walked away, he stopped searching for a reason to defend himself and began searching for the man Natalie had once believed he could become. Several weeks passed before Grant finally understood that searching every airport, hotel, and private clinic would not answer the question that mattered most. Natalie had already explained why she left. The real challenge was accepting that he had spent years hearing her words without truly listening to them. Winter slowly gave way to early spring, and the mansion no longer felt like a symbol of achievement. It had become a quiet reminder of every ordinary evening he had traded for another business dinner or another conference call. One afternoon, Detective Laura Bennett invited him to review the final timeline her office had assembled. Every document pointed toward the same conclusion. Natalie had prepared carefully for months before leaving. She had updated her medical records through proper legal channels, arranged independent financial resources using income from illustration projects completed before their marriage, and secured temporary housing without involving friends or relatives who might have been pressured to reveal her location. There was no indication of panic or impulsive behavior. Laura folded the file and looked at Grant with quiet compassion. She did not disappear because she wanted someone to chase her, she said. She disappeared because she believed she had already spent years asking to be seen. Those words remained with Grant long after he returned home. That evening, he opened another notebook Natalie had left inside the nursery bookshelf. It was filled with handwritten lists rather than letters. Baby names they had considered together. Favorite children's books she hoped to read aloud. Small family traditions she wanted to create every holiday season. Between the pages, he found a grocery receipt with a short note written on the back. The happiest memories are usually the ordinary ones. He smiled sadly because he remembered the afternoon she had written it. She had wanted to spend the evening making homemade soup while snow covered the backyard. He had canceled dinner to attend an unexpected client reception, promising they could cook together another time. Another time had never arrived. The following morning, Grant visited the company headquarters for the first time in nearly a month. Employees greeted him politely, but he noticed something he had ignored for years. Many people looked exhausted despite their professional smiles. Endless schedules and impossible deadlines had become part of the culture he had created. During an executive meeting, he surprised everyone by postponing several expansion projects and introducing new family leave policies, flexible schedules, and mandatory vacation time for senior leadership. His board questioned whether such changes might reduce short-term profits. Grant answered calmly that a successful company should never require people to sacrifice the relationships that gave success its meaning. After the meeting ended, Vanessa Reed approached him privately. She seemed unsettled by the changes and suggested he was allowing emotion to influence important business decisions. Grant listened respectfully before answering. For years I believed efficiency solved every problem, he said quietly. Now I know there are losses that cannot be measured on a financial report. Vanessa offered no reply. Driving home that evening, Grant realized his definition of success had begun to change long before he noticed it. Back at the mansion, he paused inside the nursery once again. Sunlight filtered through the windows, illuminating the rocking chair where Natalie had recorded so many messages for their child. He sat down, closed his eyes, and imagined the simple future they had once planned together. For the first time since she walked away, he did not imagine convincing her to return. Instead, he hoped that wherever she was, she had finally found the peace she had spent so long trying to create. Quietly, he promised himself that if life ever gave him another opportunity to stand beside her, he would arrive not with explanations or excuses, but with actions that proved he had finally learned the lesson she had been trying to teach all along. Nearly 3 months had passed since Natalie left, and Grant no longer measured time by business quarters or investment reports. He measured it by the quiet rituals that had slowly replaced his old routines. Every Saturday morning, he visited the neighborhood library where Natalie had once volunteered to read stories to children. Every Sunday afternoon, he returned home with fresh flowers for the nursery, not because he expected anyone to see them, but because the room reminded him that love was expressed through small acts repeated faithfully over time. One rainy evening, he unlocked another drawer in Natalie's writing desk and found a leather journal wrapped carefully in a linen cloth. Unlike the notebooks filled with lists and plans, this journal contained letters addressed to their unborn child. Grant hesitated before opening the first page, feeling as though he had been entrusted with something deeply personal. The opening lines were simple and filled with warmth. Natalie wrote that she hoped their daughter would always know she had been loved long before she took her first breath. She described quiet evenings spent reading aloud, believing the baby could already recognize familiar voices. She wrote about decorating the nursery, choosing tiny blankets, and imagining family walks on crisp autumn mornings. Grant continued reading, expecting to find anger or disappointment directed toward him. Instead, every page spoke about hope. Natalie never described herself as a victim. She never encouraged resentment. She simply wished her child would grow up believing that kindness and honesty were stronger than pride. One passage held Grant's attention longer than any other. "If your father ever reads this," she wrote, "I hope he understands that I never doubted his love. I only wished he had more time to share it." Grant quietly closed the journal and rested his hand on the cover. Those words carried no accusation, yet they revealed everything he had failed to see. He had spent years believing that providing comfort, security, and opportunity would speak louder than his absence. Natalie had needed something much simpler. She had needed him to be present. The following week, Detective Laura Bennett contacted Grant with another update. Every review of Natalie's financial records confirmed the same pattern. She had relied only on savings from her own creative work and had avoided using any shared assets. Laura explained that every legal step Natalie had taken reflected careful planning and personal responsibility. She wanted independence without creating conflict, Laura said. Everything she did showed respect, even while making an incredibly difficult decision. After the meeting, Grant drove back to the office for a scheduled board session. During the discussion, he announced a new charitable initiative supporting family resource centers and prenatal education programs throughout the state. Several executives looked surprised because the project offered no obvious financial return. Grant smiled quietly before explaining that not every investment should be measured by profit. Some should be measured by the lives they strengthen. As he left the conference room, Vanessa Reed approached him with visible uncertainty. She remarked that he seemed like a completely different man than the one she had worked beside only months earlier. Grant answered honestly. "Perhaps I am," he said. "Sometimes losing what matters most teaches you to recognize what success was supposed to protect in the first place." That evening, he returned to the nursery once again, placing Natalie's journal beside the small stuffed rabbit waiting inside the crib. Sunlight faded beyond the windows as he looked around the peaceful room. He realized he could no longer change the years behind him, but every decision ahead remained his responsibility. Whether Natalie ever chose to see him again was no longer something he could control. The only promise he could still keep was becoming the kind of father and man whose actions finally matched the love he had always believed was enough. Almost 6 months had passed since Natalie quietly left the mansion, and Grant had stopped believing that healing would arrive through a single discovery or dramatic conversation. Instead, it appeared in small moments that slowly reshaped the person he had become. He no longer arrived at the office before sunrise or stayed until long after dark. He ate dinner at home instead of inside conference rooms. The nursery remained exactly as Natalie had arranged it, not because he expected her to return at any moment, but because preserving the room reminded him that love deserved consistency rather than convenience. One afternoon, Detective Laura Bennett invited Grant to review the final documents related to Natalie's voluntary departure. Every legal record confirmed what she had explained from the beginning. Natalie had carefully planned every step without harming anyone or creating unnecessary conflict. She had chosen physicians through proper referrals, secured housing with her own savings, and continued using income she had earned independently before the marriage. Laura closed the folder and looked at him thoughtfully. "Your wife never tried to disappear from the truth," she said. "She simply stepped away from a life where she felt unseen." Driving home through the quiet countryside, Grant replayed those words over and over. For months he had searched for a hidden explanation that would somehow lessen his responsibility. There was none. The truth had always been remarkably simple. Natalie had asked for his presence many times. He had answered with promises that tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow had arrived too late. The following week, an independent audit of Grant's company reached its conclusion. Several internal recommendations previously approved through Vanessa Reed's department required additional review because of repeated procedural irregularities. Nothing suggested dramatic criminal behavior, but the findings revealed poor judgment, unnecessary secrecy, and decisions that had slowly weakened trust throughout the organization. Grant accepted every recommendation from the auditors and ordered stronger oversight for every executive, including himself. When Vanessa requested a private meeting, she appeared unusually uncertain. She admitted she had often encouraged Grant to prioritize work above everything else because she believed success demanded complete devotion. Grant listened respectfully before answering. "Success without the people you love is simply another form of failure," he said quietly. There was no argument after that. They both understood the conversation had reached its natural conclusion. That evening, Grant returned to the mansion carrying a cardboard box from his office. Inside were framed awards, magazine covers, and photographs celebrating business achievements collected over many years. He placed them carefully inside a storage room and left only one picture on the study wall. It showed him and Natalie standing beside an old pickup truck outside their first apartment, laughing in the rain before either of them had accumulated wealth or recognition. Looking at that photograph, he finally understood why she had treasured it so deeply. They had possessed very little, yet they had always found time for one another. Before going upstairs, Grant opened the nursery window to let in the cool evening air. The room felt peaceful rather than painful for the first time. He sat quietly in the rocking chair and opened the final page of Natalie's journal once more. The last sentence was written in careful blue ink. "The greatest gift we can offer the people we love is not perfection. It is our willingness to truly be there." Grant closed the journal gently and rested it beside the stuffed rabbit waiting in the crib. He could not rewrite the years behind him, and he could not ask Natalie to erase the hurt she had carried. What he could still control was every choice he made from that evening forward. If life ever allowed their paths to cross again, he wanted her to meet not the man who had once been consumed by ambition, but someone who finally understood that the richest life was measured by shared moments, quiet kindness, and the courage to place family before everything else. Nearly a year had passed since Natalie walked away from the mansion, and Grant no longer counted the months by how long she had been gone. Instead, he measured them by the ways his life had quietly changed. The board of directors had adjusted to his new priorities. He no longer accepted meetings that required sacrificing evenings or weekends without good reason. Employees who once believed they had to choose between career and family now found a leader encouraging them to attend school performances, medical appointments, and ordinary family dinners. The transformation surprised everyone who had known him during the years when ambition had occupied every empty space in his calendar. One crisp autumn morning, Grant received a handwritten envelope with no return address. Inside was a simple invitation to a community literacy fundraiser held in a small coastal town several hundred miles away. The foundation's name immediately caught his attention because Natalie had volunteered for the organization years before they were married. There was no personal message and nothing to suggest she had sent it, yet something about the invitation felt strangely familiar. He decided to attend without expecting anything beyond supporting a cause she had always valued. The event took place inside a restored public library overlooking the ocean. Families gathered throughout the building, while volunteers read stories to children in bright reading corners filled with colorful books and comfortable chairs. Grant quietly observed the smiles around him, realizing how naturally Natalie had always belonged in places where people gathered simply to encourage one another. During a presentation, the director thanked several anonymous donors whose generosity had helped expand family literacy programs across the region. Grant noticed a framed illustration hanging near the stage. The artistic style reminded him instantly of Natalie's work. Soft watercolor landscapes, gentle expressions, and hopeful scenes of parents reading with children reflected the same warmth he had seen in her sketchbooks years earlier. He approached the exhibit after the presentation ended and studied each illustration carefully. None carried the artist's full name. Only the initials N.B. appeared in one corner. His heart quickened for the first time in months, yet he remained calm. Instead of chasing possibilities, he simply appreciated seeing a familiar piece of the woman he still loved. Later that afternoon, the foundation director approached him after recognizing his name from a recent charitable donation. They spoke briefly about literacy, community outreach, and the importance of parents reading with young children. Before leaving, she smiled warmly and said, "One of our volunteer artists always says that the stories children hear first become the voices they carry throughout life." Grant recognized the sentence immediately. Natalie had said those exact words years earlier while decorating the nursery. He thanked the director without asking any further questions. Driving home along the coastline, he reflected on how different his response would have been a year earlier. Then, he would have searched desperately for every possible clue. Now he understood that trust sometimes required patience. If Natalie believed the time was right for their paths to cross again, it would happen naturally. If not, he would continue honoring the lessons she had already given him. That evening, he returned to the quiet mansion carrying a children's book purchased from the fundraiser gift shop. He placed it gently on the nursery bookshelf beside the growing collection Natalie had started long ago. Standing in the doorway, he realized the room no longer represented only the family he had lost. It also represented the father he still hoped to become. Someone who understood that the most meaningful chapters of any life were written not through extraordinary achievements, but through ordinary moments shared with the people who mattered most. Several weeks passed after the literacy fundraiser before anything unexpected happened again. Grant settled into a quieter rhythm of life, no longer searching every day for signs that Natalie might return, but carrying the hope that someday their paths would naturally cross again. The mansion had changed with him. Rooms that once echoed with hurried phone calls and business conversations now welcomed neighbors, local charities, and community gatherings supporting young families. The transformation did not erase his regrets, but it gave those regrets a purpose. One cool October morning, an envelope arrived without a return address. Unlike the brief notes Natalie had left before, this one was thicker and carefully sealed. Grant recognized the familiar handwriting immediately. He sat alone in the nursery before opening it, taking a long breath as though he already understood the importance of every word inside. The letter began simply. Natalie wrote that she hoped he was healthy and that she had heard, through mutual acquaintances, about the changes taking place inside both his company and his personal life. She thanked him for supporting literacy programs because she believed every child deserved stories that taught compassion before ambition. Grant continued reading slowly. Natalie explained that leaving had never been an attempt to punish him. It had been the only decision she believed would protect their child from growing up believing emotional distance was a normal part of marriage. She admitted that walking away had been the hardest choice she had ever made, but remaining while quietly disappearing inside the relationship would have been even more painful. She wrote that love had never disappeared between them. What disappeared was the belief that tomorrow would always provide another opportunity to reconnect. One paragraph remained in Grant's mind long after he finished reading. "Money gave us comfort," Natalie wrote, "but time would have given us memories. A child remembers who sat beside them far longer than who paid the bills." Grant lowered the letter and stared across the nursery. Every object in the room suddenly carried even greater meaning. The rocking chair represented evenings they never shared. The bookshelf represented stories she had once hoped they would read together. Even the small stuffed rabbit waiting inside the crib seemed like a quiet reminder that childhood moved forward whether parents were ready or not. Near the end of the letter, Natalie revealed one final thought. She believed people were capable of genuine change when they accepted responsibility without expecting immediate forgiveness. She hoped Grant would continue becoming the man he had recently chosen to be, not because she might someday see it, but because their child deserved a father whose character remained steady even when no one was watching. There was still no address, no request for a meeting, and no promise about the future. The letter closed with only a single sentence. If life decides our family should meet again, let it happen because we both became healthier people, not because loneliness convinced us to settle for less. Grant carefully folded the pages and placed them beside Natalie's journal inside the nursery drawer. He did not feel defeated. He felt grateful. For the first time, he understood that Natalie had given him something far greater than another chance. She had given him the opportunity to become someone worthy of one. As evening sunlight filled the room with a warm golden glow, Grant quietly opened a children's picture book and began reading aloud into the peaceful silence, imagining that somewhere beyond the distance, Natalie and their child were building a life grounded in the same kindness, patience, and hope that had always lived within her heart. Nearly 18 months after Natalie left, spring returned to the coastline with clear skies and gentle ocean breezes. Grant had long since accepted that some questions could not be answered by determination alone. He no longer searched for clues every morning or asked investigators to continue looking. Instead, he focused on becoming the father Natalie had hoped their child would someday know, even if he never had the opportunity to meet that child himself. One Saturday morning, the Literacy Foundation invited Grant to attend the opening of a new family reading center overlooking the harbor. He had become one of its largest supporters, not because he expected anything in return, but because every classroom, every bookshelf, and every smiling family reminded him of the future Natalie had always dreamed about. After the ribbon-cutting ceremony ended, children wandered through the garden outside, while volunteers handed out picture books beneath blooming trees. Grant quietly stepped away from the crowd, enjoying the peaceful atmosphere. Then he heard a familiar laugh. It was soft, warm, and unmistakably familiar. He turned slowly toward the sound. Standing beneath a flowering tree was Natalie. She looked peaceful, healthier than he had ever remembered, and completely at ease. Resting beside her stood a little girl with bright blue eyes and chestnut hair, holding a picture book against her small jacket. The child looked no older than 16 months. Grant stopped several feet away, uncertain whether he should speak first. Natalie met his eyes with calm understanding. There was sadness in her expression, but there was also quiet gratitude. Neither of them needed to explain everything that had happened. Tom had already done that. Natalie gently placed her hand on the little girl's shoulder. "This is Emma," she said softly. Grant felt emotion rise inside him, yet he remained composed. He knelt until he was at the child's eye level. Emma looked at him with open curiosity before offering him the picture book she carried. "Will you read it with me?" she asked. Grant smiled through grateful tears and accepted the book with careful hands. They sat together on a nearby wooden bench while Natalie watched quietly from beside them. Grant read each page slowly, giving every illustration the attention he had once failed to give the ordinary moments of his own life. Emma laughed at the funny characters, pointed excitedly at colorful animals, and leaned comfortably against his arm before the story ended. When he closed the book, she reached for his hand without hesitation. Natalie sat beside them. "I did not come here because I forgot the past," she said gently. "I came because people can grow, and our daughter deserves parents who choose honesty over pride." Grant nodded. "I cannot change the years I wasted," he answered quietly, "but I will spend the rest of my life honoring the years I still have." Natalie smiled with quiet warmth. She did not promise that everything would immediately become easy. They both understood that trust would continue growing one day at a time. Yet they also understood something even more important. Love could survive disappointment when it was supported by humility, responsibility, and consistent actions. As the afternoon sunlight filled the reading garden, Emma slipped one small hand into Natalie's and the other into Grant's. Together they walked slowly toward the rows of children's books waiting inside the new library. Grant realized that true wealth had never been measured by the mansion he owned, the company he built, or the recognition he received. It was measured by the chance to be present for the people who mattered most. For the first time in many years, he was exactly where he belonged, not because life had erased every mistake, but because those mistakes had finally taught him how to love without placing anything more important than family.